Commission Chair. Also in attendance today are Commissioners Mary Abbey and Craig Hogan. Absent today are Commissioners Lauren Dickinson and Jolene Goslin. Also in attendance are City Recorder Kimmy Jackson and City Planner Dan Fleischman. That's right, Fleischman, right? Yeah, okay, good. Okay, let's look at the agenda here. So, first thing on the agenda is the update from the Cascadia meeting that we had with the advisory committee. And Mary, do you want to start with that?
There was a really nice summary of all the information that we were working on with the Cascadia group. Essentially what they were talking about is looking at the code audit that they had done and then looking at things that were in legal compliance with our codes. And then looking at things that needed to have partial compliance. And essentially in the compliance area, they said that we were good on residential homes and facilities, requirements for approved needed housing and reducing density or height or condition approvals. And then what they said that we needed some partial compliance on was manufactured home parks and manufactured home subdivisions, looking at those and saying that we needed to really look at our codes a bit on where we were allowing them and what areas we needed to make some changes in order to get them into better compliance. Then they said that we needed to really change some codes that we had on limited use of land, occupancy limited based on family relationships, manufactured homes in general, occupancy for recreational vehicles, and the single room occupancies. Those we needed to have some major revisions or in fact create some codes that address those particular issues. They had some that they said that we needed to codify. In other words, do some work on in options for looking at affordable housing development on commercial land, and affordable housing as far as density and height areas. So those are, when you look at it, it's kind of a big chunk that we need to take out and start looking at. The group kind of went through and said, what do you see as the most critical to start addressing as far as Yachats is concerned. And in summary, what they looked at as a group was they said that the priorities were going to be looking at middle housing and ADUs for kind of the big piece that would take quite a bit of maneuvering on our part to get all those codes right. And then to address things like housing density and lot size, reduce setbacks and increase lot coverage, reforming some of the residential regulations within commercial zones, and rezoning some land in the R1 zones as a possibility, and affordable housing increase. And all this was in relationship to looking at how we could make some more affordable housing within Yachats, and that's how the whole thing got started. So that was with a group that we had. And then one of the things that I did was I took a look at it and said, okay, if we have to do some of these definite things, one of the things that had been a discussion that we went through was the discussion of the term family and how that had kind of an interesting connotation in our code. So I took a look at what our city code said, and then I looked at what the Oregon state statutes were. And then looked at some considerations on the whole thing and kind of listed them out so that we could have a look at it. And I've got that on that sheet. And I thought that would be a good thing to kind of do as part of our work session, is kind of throw that around and see what we could come up with as far as what made sense. And then we don't have any codes for single room occupancy. And that's something that actually a citizen approached me on and was talking about in regards to the housing that's down here on 101, that we're seeing some single room occupancy on that concept, and we don't have anything that says anything about it. So that was the other part, was to look at that as something that we could add to our codes and codify as far as that goes. So there we are.
Okay. Very good. This is a nice chart, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, why don't we talk about family?
Okay.
Because this seems to keep coming up both in, well, it turns, basically every time we turn around and talk about multifamily of some kind, it keeps popping up. But,
Mhm.
you know, how do we determine, you know, how many residents are allowed in a given dwelling? So your change, let's see, is basically to replace family, which I guess implies some sort of blood relationship of some kind or another, with household.
Well, interestingly enough, when I looked at our definition, it was pretty woke.
Yeah.
Is a good term for it, the term that we're using now. And basically, our definition imposes on occupancy a limit of 3 people if they're unrelated, and no occupancy limited for related people. But as our city planner, Catherine, had said at one point, does that mean that we go around and ask for blood tests and other assorted things on people to try and determine whether or not they're violating the code that we presently have? And it's a pretty limited one. The state, interestingly enough, has, when you look through their codes, has family all over the place in their codes, and single family housing and, you know, multiple family housing and those kinds of things. And in looking at that, I was thinking, you could say household, but what if we took it and took a definition of family that opened it up to a household type of concept? And if we put that in our definitions, then we wouldn't have to go through and change family in every single piece of the code to household or whatever other term we were going to use for that grouping.
Okay. Now the statute, Oregon statute, ORS 90.112 says city may not enforce a maximum occupancy limit for any residential unit if the restriction is based on the familial or non-familial relationship among any occupants. So
what does that mean?
yeah, doesn't that seems to me to say that you basically can't say anything about it.
Essentially, that's.
Yeah, all we could do is just specify a number, like per square foot or something. Can't say anything about DNA.
Well, no, it even says they can't enforce a maximum occupancy limit. Or
Well,
essentially, I guess you could do a minimum.
You could say, you could set an absolute,
Have one
You
person.
could set an abs.
yeah, you could say no more, you know, if it's a room in a fourplex, you can't have more than 4 people living in that room. Or something, if it's got X number of square feet, you can only have X number. Of course, that brings in a whole question about, well, and I guess that
So
Because what about health and safety stuff like?
do we have a problem with that? I mean, we have regulations. Why? We have regulations.
Well, I think, well, there's two reasons for the regulation. One is that you don't want 20 people living in a one-room apartment. And I think that was part of it. And the other part of it is, it's a health and safety thing, I'm sure. You know,
So are there state standards about that?
Dan? Do you have any input into this?
State standards.
Feel free,
Well,
please,
I don't want to jump in where I'm not invited.
don't be shy.
Historically, the definitions used for family and household were used to I think for two purposes. One, to keep multiple families from overcrowding a dwelling. And two, to particularly in places with universities, colleges, to limit the number. So a frat house wouldn't be considered a single family house, a single family dwelling with 35 students living in it. And to restrict the number of unrelated people who were living in a single family, in a dwelling. There have been, in addition to the statutory restriction that we have here in Oregon, there have been a couple of US Supreme Court cases that have restricted what municipalities can do for restricting unrelated people.
Is there any reason for Yahas to have regulations about this?
Probably not.
Right.
You don't have a university with frat houses that you need to worry about
Maybe
infiltrating a single family neighborhood.
or they're empty.
Right. And so my suggestion would be to consider and I think as your consultants have suggested here also, you probably don't have a whole lot of places in your code that the word family is used, other than in the definition sections for dwelling. What is the difference between a single family dwelling and a duplex or a multifamily dwelling? And is just refer to households. And my suggestion would be to define a household as a group of people who are living together on essentially as a single living unit. And define the dwelling by the characteristics. And if you have concerns about overcrowding, then whether people are related or not, to set restrictions for how many people per room in a dwelling unit may live in that dwelling unit. But
But there are already state rules about that.
I don't think there's state rules. I know for federally financed programs, there are standards. And I think it's I'd have to go back and look it up, but if you have more than 2 people per room, then you're considered to be overcrowded.
2 people per room.
Per room in the dwelling. So not necessarily bedroom, because then you have to get into what's the definition of a bedroom.
So if you have an apartment with 3 rooms of some kind, then
Then that, if there were 6 people there, it would be considered to be overcrowded. Because if you had a living room and 2 bedrooms, then if you had 6 people, that's 3 per bedroom.
so it's kind of like a circular thing. It's like if you have a multifamily building, a family is considered the people who occupy the room, and that's called a household. And a household is defined as the people living in a family unit.
Right. Or you can call it a multifamily building because that's a commonly used term. Nobody talks about multi-household buildings.
Okay.
We talk about multifamily.
Okay,
Define that as a building, pick your number, that has more than three or more, or four or more, depending on what other definitions you have, dwelling units in a structure. So you've defined what a structure is.
Mhm.
You define what a dwelling unit is, a room or suite of rooms
okay,
that provide cooking, sleeping, bathing. Or maybe not, because that gets into the issue of single room occupancies.
yeah, that's, yeah.
But that's
a whole-
or however you want to define that, what is necessary to be considered a dwelling unit.
Okay.
Because then, and if you're clear on that, then you avoid the discussion of, gee, does adding a second kitchen in the basement create another dwelling unit?
Which is a big question right now.
Right, right.
The next,
So, but again, if you're clear on that, and that in order to get from, for instance, in order to get from one dwelling unit to another, you have to either go outside or go into a common hallway through a door that's able to be locked. If I want to have a kitchen on my third floor, my second floor, my first floor, and my basement, just because I want to be able to cook wherever I am, that may not necessarily mean that it becomes a four unit building. Because I only have one front door, one utility meter, et cetera.
you might have an obesity problem.
That's not a zoning issue.
Hmm.
Okay, so in some ways, fixing our existing definition of multifamily buildings or whatever, it's pretty straightforward. We get rid of the definition we have of families, get that out of the code completely, the one that's in there now, and just call them living units or households. And
That does provide a basic solution.
yeah, for just, I haven't gotten this
No,
to
I'm-
the
But
single
I'm thinking
residence.
that if we did that as the definition, then we wouldn't have to go through the whole code and make multiple changes anywhere we had families
That's, yeah,
discussed. Would that be correct?
I think so. I mean, get rid of the definition of the word family,
Correct.
add a definition of the word household,
Mhm.
change your definition of single family, duplex, multifamily to refer to households instead of families, or to refer to dwellings. Make sure your definition of dwelling is clear, that you're talking about a household. And then I've only been looking at Yahat's code for about a week now. I haven't looked at everything, but there's probably not a whole lot else in there that you would need to, and then it's just a matter of sitting down and doing a search for the word family and seeing whether you need to change it or not.
okay. All right,
Because the state, when you look at their code and their statutes, they have family spread
Sure,
throughout.
they have family every place,
Everywhere.
but going back to ORS 9112 that Mark read earlier,
Yeah.
it doesn't say that you can't use the terms, or you can't have a maximum occupancy level.
Mhm.
It just says you can't enforce a maximum occupancy limit
based on,
if the restriction is based on familiar
Or no.
or not relationship.
Correct.
So it doesn't say you can't have any more than 8 people living in a dwelling unit,
So right now,
as long as you don't distinguish between relatives and non-relatives.
so if we do what we're proposing, we have no occupancy limit now for related persons. So if we lift that restriction, then we just won't have any occupancy limits.
Right.
Is that okay?
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess the question is, are we having a problem with that now? And I'm not aware of. And if it comes to that, I guess we can,
I mean, if there were a problem with, sanitation or safety or something, there's some statute.
aren't there
Yeah.
health and safety limits about?
I'm not aware of any state restrictions on how many people can occupy a space, however you define that.
I'm willing to bet that there's something within the fire
There may be fire codes,
that says that this is what the.
Right.
law is.
and again, as I know that there's occupants in federally funded things that, at least through housing and urban development, there are occupancy restrictions or what is considered to be overcrowded. Not that you can't do it.
We're not going to weigh in those types of things. Because we don't know.
In a community of this size,
Yeah.
it's probably
I'm not gonna,
not going to be an issue.
okay, all right. Then. Okay, so what's the next step then? If we need to do a search of the municipal code, and every time we see family, see what it's referring to, and get rid of the current definition from a family that's in the code right now, I just basically clean it up,
Mhm.
okay? And see where that takes us. All right. Okay, anything more on that for now? I'm sure it'll come back to us again, but.
I'm sure it'll come back again.
But for now, okay, then let's talk about single room occupancies.
Yeah. Well, we don't have a definition for single room occupancy. And Oregon code definition, single room occupancy means a development with no fewer than 4 attached units that are independently rented and lockable and provide living and sleeping space for the exclusive use of an occupant, but require that the occupant share sanitary or food preparation facilities with other units in the occupancy. So that's the state code definition.
So it's like a boarding house.
Essentially, that's kind of like what it is.
Okay.
Or somebody rents a single room that has a lock on it
Mhm.
from you, but and they have maybe a bathroom attached, or they share a bathroom. and
Yeah, it'll be a shared bathroom, or shared kitchen.
Okay.
So that's kind of the combination there, and the definition would allow single room occupancies required in R1, R2, R3, R4, and C1 code zones.
And so the problem we have now is that we just don't allow.
Right. We don't,
So there's no
we have.
issue that we have to
So
solve.
I don't know that it's not allowed, it's just not defined.
We don't have any.
We don't
have
say anything
that
about
says
it.
Anything about it.
It's just like,
So if
it doesn't
somebody
exist as far as,
built one of these things, would they be allowed to?
Even if somebody in a private residence had a room that they were renting that had a lock on it and say an adjacent bathroom, that could be a single room occupancy.
So there's not the same as an ADU because it doesn't have its own.
No,
kitchen?
that's right.
at this point, no.
Yeah, at least based on our understanding of what an ADU is, the ADU would be different because it would have its own sanitary facility and kitchen.
So, but it sounds like that situation would be the most applicable. If somebody just wants to rent a room.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's not like this isn't happening right now.
You're right.
It's just, we don't,
We don't have anything that
About
says
it.
anything about it.
So I kind of suspect we don't want to make a new regulation that invites new developers to build buildings and yachts, but we might be like to enable homeowners to rent roofs as well as they use. That was the kind of.
yeah, I think,
Well, we have somebody that's doing it.
Right.
And so that's, what the question was from a citizen, is that allowed in Yachats, single room occupancy?
right,
And was that the intention when they built a facility over here on 101 and had those
those rooms,
rooms?
yeah. And the answer to the second question is, as far as I know, is no.
As far as I know, it's no as well, yeah, but,
Um,
or even that I recall on our discussion and
That was more like an ADU to enable design. That was-
I mean, the
but
only,
it has a bathroom, it's a single room, it doesn't have a kitchen, and it has a locked door and a separate entrance. And we had questions about that.
But if we had an ADU enabling regulation, it could cover that.
It could cover that, but they don't have a kitchen.
so then,
So whatever a kitchen is.
Right. It's a hot plate kitchen.
well, that's
that's a
another,
hot
that,
issue.
that's a question.
Yeah.
So I guess the question to start with from a plus 30,000 foot level is we don't have anything for single room occupancy right now.
Correct.
And right now, it doesn't seem to be affecting anything. Is that fair to say? But so, not that we shouldn't do anything, but right now. And so my question to Dan is, are we obligated under Oregon statute to have a definition of SRO in our municipal code?
Statute does not require that you have a definition of it because the statute defines what it is.
Okay,
Correct.
let me,
But it does obligate the city to allow the development of a single room occupancy structure.
okay.
We
So,
have to do that, we have to allow.
The statute and this is a relatively new statute. I looked it up because as Mary was speaking, I was going, I've never heard of that. And that's because it was enacted by the legislature after I retired from my job in Staten. It's
In
2023.
23, okay.
okay.
So we're not exempt by our small size.
You're not, and the
So we really have.
The statute says within an urban growth boundary, each local government shall allow the development of a single room occupancy. So not only, so
And they.
not only you, but Lincoln County within your urban growth boundary and every other city's urban growth boundary must allow it with, that's paragraph 2, subparagraph A, with up to 6 units on each lot or parcel zoned to allow the development of a detached single-family dwelling. So any place that I can build a detached single-family house, I have to be allowed to build
A single.
an SRO building. And-
No fewer than 4 units and no more than 6 units.
Right. And with the number of units consistent with the density standards on a lot or parcel zoned to allow for the development of residential dwellings with 5 or more units. I'll need to read that a couple of times myself to understand what it says, but I think if you have whatever whatever zone where you allow a 5-unit building to be built, you have to allow SROs with that number of, with that density either units per acre or units per parcel or whatever. And again, I'm reading this for the very first time
Okay.
and may need to read it a couple of times to fully comprehend what the legislature is requiring.
Bobby, did you have something?
Yeah, it's, what I have got, from the meeting materials from our advisory meeting right there, just it, and then and does not comply section.
Uh-huh.
It says, right now, we have no provisions for single room occupancies, which must be allowed in residential zones.
Okay.
ORS 197A.430. So you have to allow for that.
The state says that they're allowed, so we don't need a regulation saying what they said.
I think we do.
I think
Yes,
we
no.
do.
Yeah.
I think you,
If explicitly allowed,
I think we'd be foolish not to do it.
but then we're allowed to write what we want about it. But then
You know,
what do we have to say?
what you could consider adding are standards on size of the room. Perhaps again, this is all new to me, but just brainstorming. Number of rooms or number of bathrooms per room, or number of rooms per bathroom, number of rooms per kitchen. Number of parking, if you require one parking space per dwelling unit, are you going to consider each room in an SRO to be a dwelling unit, and therefore you need one parking space per room? I mean, those types of things are things that should be on your agenda to discuss on how you're going to deal with this issue.
yeah, because on the one hand, I'm thinking, well, why make rules about a problem that you don't have? But on the other hand, is that at some point, someday, this is going to become an issue. Somebody's going to do something and have either quote unquote too many of these rooms, or the parking's going to be an issue or something. And then they're going to look to the city to enforce something. And I don't want the city to be in the position of just going and walking away. So I think, so I think it'd be worth it to come up with something. Okay. So what should we do next? Should we just use what the state says and just kind of cut and paste and do that or is that?
You will, at bare minimum, you will need to look at what your density standard for multifamily is, if you have one.
I think we do.
And translate that into how many SROs would be permitted on a lot or per acre or however it's written.
And then we're gonna have to talk about parking,
And yeah, and I think that's going to be,
a big deal.
that is likely to be a big deal.
The biggest thorn on the whole thing,
Yeah,
parking.
just like ADUs, it's gonna be,
Right,
Yeah,
parking's gonna be the big.
right. And similar to ADUs, where back in 2016 or 17 or so, the legislature said you must allow ADUs. And then 2 years later came back and said, and you can't require them to have their own parking space.
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised if 2 years from now, after cities begin to implement this and say you need to have a parking space per SRO, that the legislature comes back and says, no, you can't do that.
Yeah. And actually and this is kind of off the subject, but it kind of is. I know those state legislators say that about not requiring parking for an ADU, but I have a spreadsheet of ADU regulations for communities in Oregon of various sizes. And they all have parking requirements with the exception of Portland. So I don't understand. On the one hand, the state's saying you can't do that, and on the one hand, everybody's doing it. So,
Well, maybe some of those were written before they put forth the thing
Right.
saying you can't.
I mean, I know in Staten where I worked, we wrote our ADU rules, required a parking space. And then several years after the legislature said, no, you can't do that, got around when we were making a bunch of other code changes, got around to deleting that. So it may be, depending on when your list was compiled, that things are in flux. And also, it may be that city are saying, we don't care what the statute says, this is what we want in our community, sue us,
Which is,
which is,
just it.
which is not likely to happen because the cost of adding a parking space is a lot less than the cost of going to court.
Plus, of course, you live in Portland and then.
Well, yeah.
The cost of a parking space is pretty spendy.
so maybe we should look at the statute. I use that as a starting point for what we're gonna put in and look at our,
I guess I'd ask, how are you going to proceed with all of the recommendations that are coming out of this code audit? And just add this to the list and go through them one by one and figure out.
Well, that's the reason why I kind of picked those two to go through, because I figured they may be the least onerous as far as, trying to get to some point where we could manage it and then, continue on down the line.
yeah.
Because I know we need to, the codes that are not in compliance, we need to get straightened out and flying right.
I thought Cascadia was gonna suggest code changes to this,
They have,
specific wording, and we should say.
they are on ADUs. That's what they were hired for and what they were supposed to be doing. And what they did was they went through our code and said, okay, these are some other areas that you really need to pay attention to because they aren't in compliance. And they're looking at our housing issue, and that was kind of the whole thing.
Yes.
In a nutshell, it's housing in general. So that's why we have the RV stuff and the manufactured homes in there, as not in compliance with
Yeah,
areas that we can look at for housing options for people. But ADUs is kind of the key piece that we're really looking at.
But there are these mandatory code changes that have to happen. Shouldn't we have professionals draft those for us?
It isn't part of the contract. though.
yeah, I don't know how much they're supposed to do outside of like the ADU stuff and those stuff.
They're doing the ADU stuff and
I know, but
that's what
after
I know.
that-
After that, I think,
Yeah,
I thought there was a point we were invited to ask them to do things and ask questions.
and
We did.
this was, these things actually were not on that list.
that's correct.
Okay.
The foot.
So it's too late to ask them to do it.
Well, I mean, there's,
Is that-
Well, it's never too late and they can always say no.
and for a price, I'm sure they'd be happy to.
Yeah, I'm sure they would be.
But so I
And
think,
somebody else is paying for it. That was the other part.
Well, but that's not the contract. The contract was done by the state
yeah,
Yeah. So we got a grant through the Department of Land Conservation Department specifically for them to be looking at our code
for
and
ADUs.
housing and ADUs specifically. These are things that they've addressed in the process of evaluating and looking at how we can expand our housing and develop our code to allow for less restrictions on housing to improve density and things like that. If we choose to hire them as the city to continue doing these things, that's absolutely something we can do. It would either be us hiring them to do it, us doing it, or us hiring our city attorney to do it. For the follow throughs, but it's gonna need to be advice from the planning commission to get to that point,
Yeah.
review.
And the thing I'm concerned about is that the occupancy limit based on familial relationships is gonna get in the way of what we
All
want
sorts
to
of
do,
things.
all the things we want to do
Yeah,
with.
so we need to get that one straightened out
And,
pretty quickly. And I think the single room occupancy too is one that, because it's been brought forward already
yeah,
with questions, needs to be
yeah,
looked at.
yeah, I think if we had to put a priority, I think the familial relationship thing.
Would be
is the top
number
one.
one, yeah.
Yeah, that's the top one we need to do. Single room occupancies, it'll be nice to have. It doesn't take precedence over the ADU thing. But it would, but you know, on the other hand, it is something that's happening right now. And it is affecting a lot of people, and it would be nice if we had some sort of regulation around it for the protection of the members of the community, if nothing else.
Now, the question is, could we take it and say, point to the state statute and say, as specified within the state statute, single room housing is, single room occupancy is, and point to the state thing and say, ta-da, done, as a temporary measure until we get our act together?
The problem I see with that is the statutory definition says 4 rooms or more, and then says something that you have to allow them up to 6 rooms. So I think you need to pick a number, and the statute also says that number needs to be based on the density that you'd be applying to a 5 apartment building.
Hmm.
So that would be my concern with just saying, yeah, we're gonna do what the legislature told us to do by pointing to the statute. That there's some lack of clarity there.
The other thing that it doesn't really address is it doesn't really address single room occupancy within a single family dwelling. This just says you can build like a boarding house in a residential section. So that's essentially what it's talking about, is building a boarding house, not necessarily having single room
Converting.
occupancies throughout the city.
Which is probably what's happening here. Is that people have a single family residence and they're just taking a room and renting it out.
Yeah. And it's not Airbnb.
You're right.
Right, no, it's a long-term
Yeah,
Long
it's
term
rental,
Yeah.
but it doesn't, but the whole building isn't a suite of bedrooms
No.
with a shared kitchen.
Correct.
And that's the distinction, you can have you can,
Okay.
and so, renting a room out to a long-term boarder doesn't turn you into a boarding house.
Okay.
So this,
Any more than having a bunch of people over every other Wednesday night to play poker and gamble doesn't turn you into a casino.
Okay.
well, that's a good thing. But, but so this is basically addressing boarding houses, period. This code.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, that answers,
So then maybe we
Nice
don't have
question.
to. Maybe we don't have to escalate it quite.
By the state.
it requires us to allow it in residential
Right.
areas.
Yeah, it's not a commercial thing, it's a residential thing.
Yeah, so this is R1. Somebody could build it, in the lot next to you.
Within, and that's where we have to have those restrictions of whatever kind we come up with.
And we're allowed to put some restrictions,
Yeah.
not really clear what. Stuff
And I
like
can see parking as the big challenge.
Um,
Okay,
well. I don't know, maybe we, oh, okay. why don't we put, since it seems like, and if you could, Dan, if you could do a little bit of digging into that and come back to us and reinforce the fact that it really only applies to an actual, what the regulations apply to or don't apply to, so that right now it sounds like it's only applying to a boarding house. And if that's the case, then that, to me, lowers the priority to this versus something.
Significantly.
Yeah, because if that's all it's gonna apply to, last I heard, there's nobody planning on building a boarding house here. So I don't think we have a problem. Not to say that we shouldn't do this or we have to do it, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think that ranks that high of a priority anymore. So that takes us back to the whole defining the familiar relationship thing. Okay. So pending, unless we hear from you differently, Dan, we're gonna assume that we're just gonna defer this until we get some other things. I'd rather have rules about manufactured homes and occupancy of RVs than something about single room occupancy.
If the commission would like, I can come back to you at your June meeting, not only with those answers, but having had some time to look at your code, how things are put together. I come back with a first draft of suggested ideas for amendments
I
to
would,
deal with any of these issues
I think we need.
that they're not going to be coming back to you, to the city with.
That sounds like a good plan.
that sounds like a good idea. Okay,
So the other
anything,
ones that we're looking at are, that are not in compliance.
I know that the manufactured home and the RV thing is something that is talked about as we are definitely out of compliance and we do need to do something about those.
Yes,
I'm not sure about the limited land use decision, what that all encompasses. But, discretionary review procedures where administrative review is required is the issue. And I'm not, I don't remember what that they were talking about with that one. Discretionary review procedures where administrative review is required. Is that like conditional
I think it was,
Use?
we weren't really totally clear on wording
about,
about limited land use and I think it also had to do with things like flood zones and that kind of stuff.
oh, okay, wetlands and stuff like that?
If I may,
Yeah.
statute defines defines the term limited land use decision to distinguish it from a land use decision. And it would be your review of a site plan, a conditional use, partitioning, subdivision, pretty much anything that you deal with as a quasi judicial decision other than a change, a code text amendment, a zone map amendment, or a comprehensive plan amendment. Those are land use decisions. There was a bill enacted last session, went into effect, I believe, January 1, that yeah, I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going off of memory, but let me back up. And in statute, I believe in chapter 197, there's a set of restrictions on how you process a limited land use application, the provisions regarding public hearings, notice to the public, the statement that you need to read at the beginning of the hearing, all of that's in the statute. And my interpretation of what this new law says is that you have to follow the procedures in the statute or the other procedures that are in your code.
But we have to codify it.
But you either need to cut or I believe, and the new law, there are some people who interpret the new law to say that for a limited land use decision, you may not require a public hearing. That you have to do it as an administrative, have the city planner do it. You can have public notice, but you can't require a public hearing. I'll say, I don't read the statute that way. And I spent hours and hours going back and forth with one of the reps from the Department of Land Conservation and Development when I was working on some code amendments for a nearby coastal town. And we ended up advising that city to continue to have public hearings and public process for for subdivisions. That was the issue. The LCD was saying, no, the statute says you can't hold a public hearing for a limited land use decision anymore. I'm like, what? And again, I hadn't been following things for a year. Lo and behold, there's this new law that they're pointing to and saying that. So that's probably what this is addressing. I don't agree with DLCD's interpretation of the law, and it may take, we may need a LUBA case or a court case to figure out exactly what it means.
Okay.
I was also told when we were having that discussion that this session of the legislature was going to be potentially clarifying it.
Okay, all right.
We won't know till the legislature's adjourned.
So it sounds like we can just defer this until they decide what it is they want us to do?
Probably.
I think that,
My answer to that question is yes, probably.
Well, that's about as definite as.
Right.
Yeah, I know. Okay, just one quick question, Dan, while we're here and talking about some of this stuff. What is the definition of a kitchen? Because this keeps coming up when we're talking about ADUs. I mean, you can define what a bedroom is
Yeah.
and what a bathroom is. What is the definition of a kitchen?
I don't know if I've ever seen a land use code that actually defines that.
Okay.
So I think it can be up to you all to come up with your own definition. I mean, I noticed, going back to my earlier remarks about if I wanted to have a kitchen, multiple kitchens in my house, I see that in your code, your definition of a dwelling unit says no more than one kitchen, so that I can't
Yes.
put a sink, a range, and a refrigerator down in my finished basement
Right,
so that I can prepare snacks while we're watching the Super Bowl.
right.
you could put a sink and a refrigerator.
It depends on how you define what a kitchen is, going back to Mark's question.
Because my example was, you have somebody's son is living with them and he has his own bedroom, has an attached bathroom, and you put a microwave, refrigerator, and a hot plate in his room. Does that now constitute an ADU? Because,
That's where having good, clear definitions counts.
Can you lock the door?
well, yeah, he probably does have a lock on the door. So,
Again, we can put that on the list as we're dealing with these issues of what's a family, what's a household, what's a dwelling unit, what are you allowed to do and still have it be considered a dwelling unit? When does it become two dwelling units?
All right, I guess that's more questions for Cascadia Partners then. I'd like to hear what they're, in writing, I'd like to see what the definition of a kitchen is. Okay, let's see. We're coming up on 2:55. So unless there's any objections, I'd like to adjourn and take a 5-minute break or a little more than 5 minutes, reconvene at 3 o'clock for the public hearing. Is everybody okay with that? Okay, so we are temporarily adjourned until 3 o'clock.
Definition of a kitchen?
seats and okay. So this is the May 20 uh, uh, public portion of the Planning Commission meeting. We are reconvening with the same members in attendance. The first thing on the agenda, oh, well, no, I can't do that. The first thing on the agenda is announcements and correspondence. Anybody have anything for that? I will take that as a no. Okay, the next item on the agenda is citizens' concerns. This is open to the public to bring up any item that is not on the agenda. You have 5 minutes to make your point. And we only ask that you give your name and your address before speaking. So the floor is now yours if you wish to say anything. Inside the room, anybody have any statements they want to make?
Nothing online?
Nothing online. Okay, then we'll move on. We'll move on to the public hearing for the conditional use application by Renee Taylor and Christopher Valentine. Before we begin, I have a statement that I need to read, so please bear with me. The public hearing for an application to reduce side yard setbacks, number 2-CU-PC-25, Renee Taylor and Christopher Valentine, applicants in the C1 district, is now open. My name is Mark Sakamoto, and I am Chair of the Planning Commission. Our commission typically is responsible for two types of land use actions, those which are quasi-judicial and those which are legislative. Today's conditional use action is considered quasi-judicial as it affects a specific parcel of land. The application is evaluated based on specific standards and criteria that exist in the Yachats Municipal Code, and the Planning Commission is the final decision-making authority. As is the case with any quasi-judicial action brought before the Planning Commission, the burden of proof rests with the applicant to demonstrate that the proposed use will be in conformance with the city's adopted comprehensive plan and meet all applicable standards of the Yachats Municipal Code. The Planning Commission will hear from its planning staff regarding the application, from the applicant, and from anyone else who wishes to testify before the commission on this matter. There are no applicable review criteria for this application. Upon completion of the public testimony, the commission will close the hearing, deliberate among its members, and ultimately make a decision whether to approve the conditions, or deny the application. The applicant or any affected party may appeal the Planning Commission's decision as provided for in the Yachats Municipal Code. Does anyone here today wish to object to the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? No. Does any commissioner wish to make any disclosure or abstain from participating or voting on this application because A, a possible financial gain resulting from this action, B, your own property within the area entitled to receive notice of this hearing, C, you have a direct private interest in the proposal, or D, you have determined that you cannot be impartial? Apparently not. Okay. Does any commissioner need to declare any contact, written or oral, otherwise, prior to this hearing with the applicant or any other party involved in this hearing or any other source of information outside of staff regarding the subject of this hearing? If so, please state with whom you had contact and what was said. To begin with, in the interest of full disclosure, I did discuss this matter briefly with Commissioner Lauren, who happened to be sitting next to me and let me know that he wasn't going to be here. And so he brought up this particular item, but that's about all we discussed. Yes.
I've walked by the property on multiple occasions,
Okay.
so
That's about, but that you didn't discuss it with
no, I didn't discuss it with.
Craig?
I don't know.
Okay, all right. To the city planner, has the commission been given all written testimony that has been submitted to date?
As far as I know, but I'm
Yes.
relying on Kimmy for that.
Okay.
Yes.
Does the commission feel they have had adequate time to review all written testimony?
Yes.
Okay. Will the city planner please present the staff report, including a summary of the application, its conformance with the city comprehensive plan, the Yachts Municipal Code, and any staff recommendations for the commission's consideration?
Will do. So I want to first begin by, even though this file number indicates it appears to be a conditional use, this is not an application for conditional use approval. This is a request to reduce the setback, so it has nothing to do with the use of the property. A single-family detached dwelling is permitted outright in the C1 zone. It is not a conditional use. The code says that yards proposed to be less than the minimum yard requirements, which apply in the residential zones, shall be subject to approval by the Planning Commission through a public hearing in accordance with Chapter 972 on conditional uses. I interpret that to mean that you have to hold a public hearing. We look to Section 972 as to what that means, who gets notified, etc. But that does not turn this into a conditional use application.
Okay, so, let me see.
Because the code says in each zone, these are the uses that are permitted outright. And these are the uses that are permitted as conditional uses.
Okay. But a setback is not a conditional.
And a reduction, and it's not a variance. Because a variance is when you ask to do something that the code doesn't allow. Here, the code has said the Planning Commission is authorized to allow this after holding a public hearing.
So.
Sorry to blow your mind.
Is that the same as a variance?
It is close to this, it is similar to a variance. But again, a variance is when the code says you shall be 10 feet away. And I want to be 9.5 feet away. So I come in and say, and there are standards that I need to show of why I can't be 10 feet away. I have unique circumstances that apply to my property and not next door and not across the street. This is not a variance because the code says it is permitted after it is approved by the Planning Commission.
And we don't have any criteria to.
And that's the second part of my spiel is the code does not provide any criteria, does not provide any standards. And therefore, my advice is that anything other than saying yes would therefore be considered arbitrary and capricious, to use the legal terms for when you're doing things other than what the code says you should do.
But doesn't the C1 code refer back to the R codes as far as what the height of the house should be and what the setback should be?
The height of the house determines what the setback should be.
That there's
In
actually
the-
specific setbacks in R1, R2, R3.
They're all the same.
Right.
In each, all three zones have the same standard.
And so does C1 for residential.
And for a residential use in the C1 zone, those setback requirements from the residential zones apply
Correct.
and say that a minimum of 5 feet or a 3-to-1 ratio based on the building height,
Right,
whichever is greater.
correct, okay,
So any building that's taller than 15 feet, as measured by the definition of building height,
correct.
needs to be more than 5 feet away from the side yard setback.
Correct.
In this case, the proposed building height is 28 feet or something close to that, right? And so therefore needs to be 9 point, whatever the math works out to be, feet. And the site plan that you have in front of you shows a 5-foot setback.
Correct.
And the code says you're authorized to approve that after holding this hearing. But doesn't give you any standards by which to not approve it.
But in the, and you saw the revised Title IX statute that was just approved. And
Yes.
in that, there's an entire section about, well, and I think I know where this is going, but it has an entire section about what constitutes approval of a conditional use application.
It lays out a number 9 or so criteria
Right.
for approving a conditional use application.
Right.
I'm suggesting this is not a conditional use application. This is an application for a setback reduction that the code says you follow the public hearing procedures for as if it was a conditional use, but it is not a conditional use that needs to meet those however many conditional use approval criteria.
Okay. Well, then let's, I think maybe after this hearing, the public hearing portion is over, I think we need to have a discussion about what we should, or how these things should be handled,
Definitely.
because
Outside of this
how
proceeding,
other, I guess more importantly, how other municipalities handle these kinds of requests, whatever you want to call
right?
them. Okay,
And that's my staff report. Other than to say, I've provided you, in my written staff report, a number of options. At the time of writing that, my recommendation was to approve this application. That's still my recommendation. I provided you with a draft order of approval, but I have now provided you on your desk in front of you a revised draft, because after drafting that, I was made aware that there were written comments received. So the difference between the original draft that was in your packet and what's in front of you is on page 2 under paragraph E about public comments. I've now, where previously I said no comments were received,
Oh, I see, yeah.
it now says comments were received from 4 neighboring property owners prior to the public hearing, and all the comments received were supportive of approval of the application.
all right, well, that's interesting. Okay, let me get back to my spiel. Okay. Okay, the public testimony portion of the public hearing is now open, and I encourage anyone who wishes to speak either for or against or ask questions regarding the proposed side yard setback reduction to now do so. Please direct your testimony or evidence to the appropriate provisions of the Yahat Municipal Code. Failure to raise an issue based on these applicable standards or criteria during this hearing so that the planning commission has the opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude your right to appeal to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Anyone wishing to address the planning commission is first requested to identify themselves as wishing to speak, and when called upon, begin by giving their full name and address. Please give your mailing address. I will start the public testimony by inviting the applicant to please present his or her application to the planning commission, including how the proposal will comply with the applicable provisions of the Yachats Municipal Code and any other relevant testimony that could factor into our decision. So, who wishes to testify? Okay. Please have a seat in front. Good.
Renee Taylor, 510 4th Street. Yachats.
Okay, Ms. Taylor, you have the floor.
I'm Renee, and this is my husband, Chris, and our Aunt Cheryl. Chris and I purchased the house at 510 and the adjacent lot, 536 4th Street, in August of 2019. At the time, we planned to someday build a wellness space there. The pandemic made a wellness space feel too risky for a career. So we instead purchased Yaquina Nursery upriver and have since made that our livelihood. Cheryl moved in with us in the beginning of 2024. And like us, Cheryl has decided to make this her forever home. We would like to build that home on the empty lot at 536 4th Street. It feels important to communicate that it was never our intention to draft a home that did not meet the standard code requirements as they are written. I began discussions about building requirements and processes with the city planner in May of 24. Our first draft was completed in September of 24. It was at that time we learned that our original setbacks were incorrect and of the requirement and process for wetland determination. We went back to the drawing board with the design and completed the application for wetland determination. The state determined that our lot was not a wetland. We have also completed a Native American artifact survey and determined that the lot is suitable for our build. In early December 24, I met in person with the city planner and my drafter, who is also a city planner for the city of Springfield in Oregon, to clarify the parameters of the code in regard to side yard setbacks so we could finalize the drawings for Aunt Cheryl's home. This discussion and others had, as reference, written emails that described in detail our drafter's interpretation of the city code, for which we were seeking confirmation from the city. These meetings led us to believe our side yard setbacks met code. Unfortunately, we learned quite a bit later that we were not on the same page despite our efforts. So we landed here today. The city planner and manager have discussed with us that Yachats is looking to update the codes to accommodate medium density housing and provide some relief in the current climate of housing as it stands across our state. We have also studied the code update document and cascade view graphs prepared for today's planning commission meeting. It feels worthwhile to bring these drawings as they are for your consideration today. And it feels worthwhile both because we are really hoping to work with Stephen Lippincott on this project, and time is of the essence in regard to securing him as our contractor and getting moving on this project. So going back to the drawing board at this point is pretty intense on a number of fronts. And it feels worthwhile because it feels that the drawings are in alignment with the same goals as what the city is seeking. We share the vision of Yachats as encouraging diverse housing and businesses while respecting and preserving our unique small town atmosphere in our special part of the coast where the mountains come very close to the ocean. We respectfully request approval for a reduction in the side yard setbacks for our new residential build within the commercial zone. The proposed residence allows for independent living on each level with minimal remodeling. This thoughtful design also makes the residence adaptable to multiple uses such as caretaking family members or creating affordable housing. The residence is modestly sized at 1,928 square feet, and its compact footprint with a reduced side yard setback also provides flexibility for future options such as an ADU, should the code allow, while maintaining front and backyard setbacks. The smaller second floor also preserves the current small town atmosphere of our neighborhood by avoiding the tall box look. The proposed home does not represent a departure from the feel of the neighborhood. Every neighbor sharing a property line with the proposed residence has submitted a written letter of support for our request. Both neighbors east of us have also written letters of support, and they're both here today. And basically what that means is that every household on the south side of 4th Street west of Pontiac is supportive of our application. I spoke with one close neighbor from 3rd Street who does not share a property line, who also supports it, but is out of town and doesn't do email. Our neighbors on the north side of 4th Street have recently passed away, and if their family was available for comment, we doubt they would be opposed, as our proposed dwelling is set back well in excess of the 20-foot minimum. Finally, we believe our request for reduced side yard setbacks is a modest one and consistent with city goals, and we thank you for your time and consideration in this hearing.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Taylor. Any questions so far?
Jolene
Okay.
has joined us.
Oh, hey, Jolene. Okay, let's see, where are we now? I now invite anyone else who wishes to speak to this application, either for or against, to indicate their interest in doing so, so that you may be called upon. So in the room, raise your hand. Sure.
My name is Brian Serbu. I live on 7th Street, 251 West 7th Street. I have kind of overlapping titles to contribute to it. I'm the manager of the Dublin House Motel, which owns the 3 lots to the east, not contiguous, but 1 lot separated. And then my father and I sent in a letter of support to this. I'm not speaking on his behalf, but I manage the company that owns the lots. And so on behalf of our company and ownership of those 3 lots, we support this. My only comment other than supporting it is that my reading of it and my experience as a contractor, a person living here for 38 years, is that I don't see that there is a conflict with the setback rules or why there's a hearing about it. My understanding from other cities as well is that there is no conflict in their interpretation of how to use a height-based setback rule. And then generally, we added a comment about how height rules. My father was 12 years on the Planning Commission for Yachats in the past, and he had always championed increasing those height limits for density purposes and ease of issues such as this, from like 30 feet to 35 feet in the residential space. There are other limiting factors like neighborhood limitations in not CCNRs, but the term evades me for the limiting documents for a neighborhood. But in general, we support this as well as a simplification of those things, such as the overall height chart that is given by Yachats for calculating what is the height above the ground, because it is very difficult for myself as a contractor and a resident in trying to figure out how to use land. So that's all.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody online? Comment? Yes.
I'd like to make a brief statement.
Oh,
Something, Brian.
Can you come up?
Yeah.
Thank you. And your name again?
Cheryl, 510 4th Street. Since Brian brought up the interpretation, I just like to, and our drafter is also a city planner in Springfield, as Renee mentioned. And, you know, instead of saying it's the maximum building height divided by 3, it actually includes the 1 to 3 slope. And so you'll notice in our drawings, you come in from the property line, as soon as you reach 15 feet, you've got your 5-foot minimum. And then it goes 1 to 3 in. That's why it's respectful of the neighbors and doesn't seem, it keeps the small town because the second story is actually small. So we were abiding that 3 to 1 slope, which comes back and intersects at the property line. I didn't realize Brian was going to bring that up, but I just wanted to explain what we wrote down in the discussion with the city planner and our drafter, and that's how we understood the statute. And if you go to Waldport, they put extra words in about the offset is indeed 10 feet at 30 feet height. And they just put extra words so that that is understandable. You still need the greater than statement because indeed, if you had a house that was only like 14 feet tall, this slope thing would give you an offset less than 5 feet and you don't want that. So greater than applies to the slope interpretation, the 3 to 1 that's in our code as well. So we thought you were following.
Okay, thank you. Anyone, actually, that's an interesting point. Of course, not that this really applies, but that's an interesting point. When we say, because it is tied into the height of the building, if the height of the roof is within 5 feet and it's a single and it's within the 15 feet, and then built on top of that and set back from there is a taller section of the house. We don't count that, do we? We just say the absolute height of the building divided by 3 is how much of a setback you need. It doesn't matter how it's configured, how that height appears. Because isn't the part of the reason is a fire safety thing to be able to get a ladder on the roof? You need so much space to put a ladder up. I thought I read that somewhere. Is that?
That's part of the reasoning that we have side setbacks, but also just to make sure there's adequate space between buildings for ventilation, so you don't open your window to find the brick wall of the building next to you right outside your window. So fire doesn't spread between buildings, to provide green space, et cetera, et cetera. The language in the code for side setbacks in the residential zones is each side yard shall be a minimum of either 5 feet or 1 foot for each 3 feet of building height,
We have that calculation.
whichever requirement is greater. And building height is a defined term,
Right.
meaning the highest point on the building.
All right.
So I believe that's why
Okay.
Catherine came up with the interpretation she did. It's an interpretation I would come up with. And for what it's worth, it was concurred with by the city attorney as well.
Okay. All right.
So, and if the applicant felt that that really was an error, they could have filed some type of request for interpretation or whatnot. They did not. They filed their application to get the setback reduced. And that's the application that's before you.
Okay. All right. Now, there was some other written testimony submitted, is that correct? Or,
The last one was put on yesterday, and that was just, I think the last one I sent you.
and it's all supportive?
It's online, yeah, it's all.
It's all supportive, okay. Neil, did you have something?
Sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry. Uh,
Can I make a point of clarification?
sure.
Because you brought up the fire ladders and fire codes and fire spreading, I just want to make it clear that the 3-to-1 slope that has been followed by our plans and in our plans is concurrent with that fire code.
Okay,
So the only thing that might, that would be against that would be going straight up
yeah,
a few stories, but it is well within fire code, and it is the same code
okay,
as many cities.
okay. Thank you. All right, all right, I guess, the applicant already has commented on the public testimony. Do any of the commissioners have any questions they would like to ask any of those presenting testimony today? Okay. The commission would like to thank all those that have presented evidence or testimony either in writing or at this hearing. We would like to remind everyone that the planning commission may only consider the evidence and testimony that strictly pertains to the applicable criteria as stated in the notice of hearing and at the beginning of this hearing. The public testimony portion of this hearing is now closed. I don't know how much deliberation we need to make at this point. Craig,
It's fine to me. Just seeing the problem.
Mary?
Well, I just want to say, it's interesting that you looked up all the codes from all the other different areas and obviously had them in exquisite detail. And it's really a shame that that got you hung up when it came to our code. So,
That was a year after, 8 months.
but I'm just saying, it is interesting that kind of is the situation that occurred. Obviously, what you're asking for is you're asking for a variance on that, and I don't see any problem with that at this point.
Yeah, even if we didn't have this whole issue, of whether we can even discuss this as a conditional use thing, I don't see it. I don't really have a problem with it being approved at this point. I mean, I don't, it doesn't seem to be that.
Jolene got her hand up. Did you have your hand up, Jolene?
Jolene? Oh, okay.
Sorry, I was
Okay.
itching my head.
Seems to be a lot of that going around today.
Poison oak season.
Yes, I screwed through.
Yeah. Okay, so at this point then, I need a motion.
Before a commission members offers that motion, my recommendation is now, since we've had testimony at the public hearing that's not reflected in even the revised draft, is that you approve the application and direct staff to further revise the order of approval to reflect the testimony at the public hearing. And then that would be the way I'm used to things working in the city I worked for. With that simple of a revised draft, it would then be presented to the chair to be signed. And not have to wait to come back to the next meeting.
Okay,
I don't know what your typical protocols are.
we kind of do that.
Yeah.
Too.
So I'd make these changes, get it emailed to Mark and the office staff and get it, they can print it out, sign it, and then we're good. Yeah,
Okay, does,
show's over.
So I move that we do not.
That's an excellent motion.
okay, Commissioner? Hogan?
I vote yes.
Yes.
Abby? The chair votes aye also, so your application is approved.
Jolene,
Oh, Julie, sorry. My apologies.
Approve.
All right. That's what you get for being in Wenatchee instead of here. Okay, I think we are done with that. Congratulations. And so let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is, I gotta find the agenda first. There it is. Okay, let's see, no, that's not it. There it is. Okay. Okay, so since the ongoing business, let's just put it under ongoing business. So how do most cities handle these setback requests? Because they must get them.
There's a variety of ways. Some cities say a setback can be here's the minimum setback. A setback of less than that may be approved by staff, provided the fire chief is okay with it, the ambulance crew can get a stretcher back there, or whatever other criteria, again, criteria by which to judge whether it's okay or not. Sometimes there's staff can approve up to, let's say, a 50% reduction in the setback, and anything less than that would be considered a variance.
Okay.
In which you have to, again, as I said before, show hardship, unique circumstances. You know, it isn't just because I want the building this big. Others put right in the code that, you know, it doesn't even need to go through a staff procedure. Setbacks for buildings that are this tall or, you know, less than this tall or this much, and taller than that are more. And you essentially have that, but it's not as clear.
But
Or you just handle it as a variance and you don't say anything.
that's what I was gonna say.
The minimum setback is X, and if you want X minus 0.01, then you apply for a variance.
Okay. That kind of makes sense. So really, there's nothing wrong. There's really nothing wrong with the way we've written the setback requirements. It's just the way how do you deal with somebody who wants less than what the setback would.
Right, and the concern I have on one hand is that you've set up a procedure that appears to be a discretionary procedure before the planning commission, yet there's no standards for which you all judge the application, so therefore it's a mandatory approval, in my mind. And that would be the other thing, to say the planning, you know, setbacks less than what's required may be approved by the planning commission upon findings that, again, and you have the standards, you know, you require essentially approval. Probably the most important thing is approval from the fire department or district, whatever you got.
So, but if we got into that much detail, it would be pretty cut and dried about whether to approve that or not.
And it's still cut and dried. That's right.
It'd still be a staff issue.
So why, right, so, you know, again, if it's cut and dried, why not make it a staff issue? Allow,
Okay.
and again, I don't know, I haven't looked at Yahat's code carefully enough to know what other types of things staff is authorized to do and what those notice and procedures are. But in the city I used to work for, you know, it would save the applicant 2 or 3 weeks by having a staff level decision versus having to go to the planning commission.
Yeah, and as much as we enjoy these public hearings, yeah, I'd
Right.
avoid them. Yeah.
Well, what if we were in a different situation where all the neighbors object? Then you might want the planning commission to have a voice.
Yeah, but if it's clear cut, I mean, unless one of the criteria is that unless neighbors complain, in which case it becomes an issue. But if we don't have that in there, and if we just say,
Right.
if we get fire department approval and, whatever, first responder
We
approval.
shouldn't care what the neighbors.
Well, I'm not so much would care. I mean, theoretically, the setback requirement takes into account what the neighbors would want.
Yeah.
And so if we say you have to hit these criteria, then it's approved. If you don't hit that criteria, and one of the criteria, and that criteria should take into account whatever neighbor objections would be. I don't know what that would be necessarily. Maybe we need to talk about that, but we just do it that way. And then we go through staff and then check the list. And then if the homeowner still objects, then we go to the variance. Does that sound like how we should?
Well, I would caution you against using the neighbor's objections as a criteria.
No, I would, yeah, I don't want to do that.
We don't like these people next door. So
Yeah.
therefore, we're gonna object to whatever they want to do
Yeah,
just because we don't like them. That can't be a reason for the city to grant or withhold approval of something.
so yeah,
And it may be that everybody doesn't like the applicant, but still,
Well, then they shouldn't.
then they should be moving.
Yeah, they should.
forward.
Yeah, really.
Here. We only have friendly people here.
okay. All right, well then, you weren't here. I think this is like the second or third setback application we've gotten since I've been on the commission. So it's not like it's an unusual request. So I don't know, should we look into having that, building that criteria? Or, because my preference would be to make it a staff issue, just because it's simpler.
That would be, my recommendation is primarily come up. If you're going to allow a reduction other than through the variance process,
Okay.
then have at least a criterion.
Okay.
And then secondly, if it really is gonna be a cut and dried objective criteria, then why bother having a public hearing that gives the public the impression we care about what you say,
Right,
but
we're gonna prove it anyway.
we're gonna approve it anyway. Because they meet, they got a letter from the fire chief saying it's okay, and that's the criterion for approval.
All right. I guess that's what we'll do. Another thing to look into.
Right, we can add that to the list.
I
of
know.
Yes.
Yeah, really.
code amendments.
We're gonna keep you busy, yeah.
Okay, there was one other thing. In the documents for, this meeting, I should have covered this, I think, in the work session. Lauren submitted a report about invasive plants,
Right.
that the meeting that he had with the
I saw
Parks
that.
and Commons.
Yeah,
And I don't see, I mean, it's interesting, and I'm glad they're having that discussion. So I guess the bottom line, the last point Lauren made was that the Parks and Commons will discuss and come up with an ordinance about invasive plants, and then pass that on to the Planning Commission. And then we can start discussing how we want to incorporate that into the municipal code, and how we will, and recommendations for enforcement as well. But it looks,
so now we're gonna have to have a botanist on staff?
well, hopefully there won't be too many invasive plants we have to identify. And they are pretty, the ones that I know of are pretty straightforward. It's just not the way it looks, this is not going to be native plants only requirement. It's going to be the really obnoxious invasive plants like Scotch broom, blackberry,
Yeah.
the typical knotweed, the big ones that everybody knows about are. So I don't think identification will be it. The interesting thing, of course, it will be code enforcement, but I will leave that up to the city manager to worry about. Other than that, what else? I don't know. Do we have anything else? No, I don't have anything else here. So let's see what else. New business reports. Oh, I didn't bring the commission chair's report with me. I think the big ones are actually with the progress on the library and the log church, which I think everybody has seen there. We're actually making progress, and we actually look to complete those things. There are some issues they are still working through, but we're moving along. Budget is the main thing taking up our time right now. And we're meeting about and finalizing the budget for the coming fiscal year. Oh, and that reminds me, Bobby, it's at 4:30 is the tabletop exercise.
That was yesterday.
That was yesterday?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was today. Sorry, never mind. Sorry, I guess I missed it.
Mark and I have Jacqueline Danielson's hand up.
Oh, yes, Jacqueline?
Yeah, hi there. I just wanted to point out, I don't know if you're aware, if you look in our municipal code in section 5, hold on, let me try to open it again. 5.08110, there's a whole section on noxious and invasive vegetation.
Okay. Does it identify?
It
And list-
has, yeah, it has from A to J, a list of weeds.
Okay,
And then underneath that, it's got another section with another list of of things. I mean, it's probably, it's pretty specific. So if you pull up it's 508110.
so is this more an enforcement and issues and management issues then versus identification of?
It looks like it's got both of them in there, but it's under the, what's it called? Nuisance stuff.
Oh, there's.
Yeah.
Okay,
So what's happening is the planning commission is reviewing the whole code, whole nuisance code related to invasive species and kind of clarifying it, editing it, making it more clear. And then we'll be, going through the list of identified plants as well.
okay. All right. Let's see what else. Okay. I assume there's no planner's report. Is that safe to assume?
Definitely.
Okay, all right.
Didn't even know I might be expected to have one.
You're expected to have one. But I guess you can discuss that with Bobby about how that's gonna work out. Let's see, the meeting summaries, any questions or comments or changes for the meeting summary? Previous meeting summary?
Correction, but that's been done.
Oh, okay.
The spelling error.
Oh. The issues list, I've kind of put the issues list on hold, though I may start to write because things are coming up now, but lately there haven't been a lot of new issues. Most of them are being looked at through the Cascadia Partners group. So, but with some of the things that just came up today, maybe I should relook at that and start opening up those issues. Like what we talked about with the setback stuff. So we can have it on the list of things to look at.
I have a quick comment on your issues list.
Yes,
We would like to bring our fee schedule to the planning commission to review in June so that we could take it to July city council for adoption.
okay,
And you will be reviewing the title, not the fees related to title.
okay, cool, great, good news. Any update on wetlands?
Yeah, that should be wrapped up within this month.
Swear to God,
Yeah. Yeah.
wow. Hallelujah, okay, we should have a really
We
big.
should have a party.
Yeah, we should have a party for that. I should have. Okay. Any other business that anybody has? Jolene, anything?
Yes, we did have the Civic Campus Committee,
Oh,
open
yeah.
house, and it was well attended. And they came forward with, kind of a centralized, recommendation. And I think, Bobby, did that go forward to, at least a presentation to the council?
So the next steps are, they're working on kind of a cost analysis and time analysis to it all right now. And there will be a presentation to the Parks and Commons Commission on the June 3rd meeting at 2 p.m. And then we will have another advisory group meeting, and we had originally had it scheduled for the first week of June also, but just through some communications today, we're going to push that back to the last week of June with the advisory group. And then it's due to go to council for adoption in July, their third Wednesday of July.
Cool, very good.
So that happened. And then lastly, I have been appointed to the board for the Lincoln County Habitat for Humanity.
Great.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be a part of their committee or their organization.
Great, great. Okay, anybody have anything else? All right, then that's a wrap.